Hey, I would like to welcome everyone back to round two of Cryptic Critters. We did this class a couple of days ago, and the reason we're doing it again is to do a better recording. We had some technical issues a few days ago. I think it was some regional transponder issues that some folks weren't getting the signal as well as they should. So I decided to re-record it. We're not going to have any people in the class today. Someone might pop in here or there, but I wanted to go through the presentation once again to provide a better product for those receiving the recording. So with that, what I want to do is welcome everyone to the Cryptic Critters webinar. What we're going to do today is talk about the art of camouflage. Hey, Sandy. Just saw that you popped in. I'm going through the presentation. It might be you. There might be one or two other people, but I'm going to go through the presentation just so I can get the recording down to send out to all the folks that registered. So now that you're here, I'm going to start it all over again if you don't mind. So want to welcome you to the Cryptic Critters webinar. What we're going to do today is we're going to talk about the art of camouflage. And so it is actually a really interesting topic the more we got into it. And so if you sit back, relax, if you have any questions or anything, by all means, Sandy, go ahead and type them. And if anyone else pops in, you can let them know what's going on. Because, like I said, we're not going to have many folks here, but I want to make sure I get a good recording for the people that registered for this. So without further ado, I'm going to jump into the webinar. And fortunately, I don't have to go over my wildlife experience. Most of you know who I am and what I've done, but I do have a vast amount of experience dealing with wildlife, over 20 plus years working in the world of wildlife. And so the one thing I do promise whenever I get to this slide is everything that we present is going to be science-based. This is the leading science. I'm not providing any opinion or this is what I think is going on. I'm providing you the latest science. So hopefully you'll take comfort in the fact that what you get from Wildlife for You is really sound, good information about our wonderful world of wildlife. So what we're going to do today is talk about this idea of camouflage in wildlife. And the one thing that I thought was so very interesting when I started researching this project, or this particular presentation, was I noticed the interconnectedness with this presentation and a few others. I don't know if you joined in, but if you were part of our previous webinar on predator-prey relationships, it was the Eat or Be Eaten webinar, we talked a lot about how most animals today survive and function in this predator-prey relationship. I believe, if I remember correctly, it was something like 87% of the animals are either eating other animals or getting eaten by other animals. And when you think about that predator-prey relationship and how it relates to this world of camouflage, it's so interconnected, because if you are a predator, you are trying to hide from your prey item so you can get close to catch it. And obviously, if you are a prey item, you're trying to hide from that predator that's trying to eat you. And so we're going to talk about how animals adapt and how they camouflage and can use this to their advantage just to survive. But it is so much more than just about hiding in the grass. And so let's jump into this right away and just talk a little bit about camouflage and how do animals hide from other animals. And there are two particular types. There's two ways in which animals can avoid detection from other animals. And so the first one we're going to talk about is a fancy word. I'm going to use it a couple of times, but it's called mimesis. And what mimesis is when an animal imitates or resembles something else. Many times it's an inanimate object like a leaf or a twig, but sometimes they will resemble other animals to avoid detection, or at least to avoid being preyed upon. And so when you think of mimesis, the best thing to think about is mimicry. One animal, like I said, will mimic something else to avoid detection or avoid being eaten. And so we're going to talk quite a bit about this concept of mimicry or mimesis. But then there is another type of camouflage that we're going to talk about, which is going to be called crypsis. And this is more or less the art of blending into your surroundings. And so when you think about that, one of the animals I love to show and talk about is this critter here. If you do not see it, this is a nightjar, and it is an amazing animal. It's a bird that, that simply blends into the surroundings better than any other animals I know. So they're phenomenal at blending in. And so we're going to talk about those two concepts, that mimesis and crypsis, and flesh them out a little bit more. So to get started, let's throw this idea of mimesis out there. And remember, what we're talking about here is this concept of mimicry. And so here's a couple examples of animals that mimic something else. And in particular, these are inanimate objects. So what we see here is a walking stick. Many of you are familiar with or have seen these before. They're so cool to play with. But typically, if you're out and about in the wild and you see this, oftentimes you do not detect these walking sticks. Sometimes you'll notice them if they're on your screen door or somewhere on your house, but they look exactly like a twig out there. And so this protects them from their predation from birds or other critters that would typically feed on the insects. Here's another great example. I love this particular picture. This is an orchid mantis. So that thing on the left is a praying mantis that is designed to look like that orchid. And so that mantis actually blends in, so it may not get eaten by a bird because the bird will think it's just another flower. However, that mantis also used this form of mimicry to lure some of its prey items, which are other smaller insects. And so we're going to talk about that strategy as well. And then last but not least, here's a wonderful photo. I believe this is a lizard down in Southeast Asia, but this guy completely mimics those leaf forms on the tree in which he lives. And so those are three prime examples of mimicry where they're actually looking like another object. But we're going to take this a step further, and we are going to talk about different forms of mimicry. And so just sit back and try to understand, just absorb it, because at the end I think it will click. But the first thing we're going to talk about is this Batesian mimicry. And so what I'm going to do, I'm going to put up three different critters up here. We've got this swallowtail on the left, this insect there, and then this snake. And what I want to do is show you the mimics that they're trying to copy. So there's the other animal that this swallowtail is copying. There's the bug that these insects are copying, and then obviously here's the third one of the snake. Now, when we're talking about Batesian mimicry, it's really simple to understand, and literally what it is you have a good or a harmless animal that is trying to mimic a harmful or maybe a venomous animal. And so I don't like using the term good and bad, but when you put it in the context of an animal that's poisonous or venomous or will sting you, we'll call those the bad animals. And so you have a good animal. So looking at these butterflies, the butterfly on the right is, I forget the name of it. It's eluding me right now. But the butterfly on the right is a swallowtail, but it is harmful or distasteful to birds that try to eat it. And so birds learn to avoid that particular butterfly because it doesn't taste good. So that butterfly on the left is called a spice bush. That's what it is. The bad one is called a pipe vein butterfly. The one on the left is a spice bush butterfly. The one on the left is actually very tasty and good for birds to eat, but they avoid it because they think it's one of those bad butterflies. And so that's an instance of where you have a good animal, a tasty, a harmless animal that is mimicking a harmful or distasteful animal. Now let's switch over to the insects. The insect on the right, believe it or not, that is a hoverfly. It's not a stinging insect at all. And what it's doing, it's mimicking just a regular old bee that could sting you. And so that hoverfly looks exactly like a bee. And so when people see these hoverflies, they'll tend to avoid it because obviously they don't want to get stung. And so that's another example of a good animal mimicking a bad animal. In this case, it's one that could sting you versus one that won't sting you. And then last but not least, up at top, we have examples. The good snake, quote unquote, is a non-venomous king snake. The bad snake is a venomous coral snake. And so people tend to see that color pattern of the yellow, the black, and the red, and they'll avoid it because they know that there are some snakes out there that have that yellow, black, and red color pattern that are venomous and could hurt you really bad if you get bitten by it. And so you have a non-venomous good snake that mimics this bad snake. So that's Batesian mimicry. That's a good or harmless animal mimicking a bad or harmful animal. Now, let's switch gears and talk about another form of mimicry called Mullerian mimicry. And don't worry about remembering any of this. It's just interesting information. You're not going to be tested later on. And so what we have a picture here are two butterflies. We also have pictures of two insects. I'm going to use that same insect as before. In this particular situation, let's talk about the butterflies. The butterflies, both here, you have a viceroy and you have a monarch butterfly. Both of these butterflies are quote unquote bad. They're distasteful or poisonous to birds. And so birds learn to avoid this color pattern. So in this particular situation, you have two bad animals displaying the same color patterns, so all animals leave them alone. Same thing with the insects there. You have a bee that can sting you as well as a hornet that can sting you. So you have this yellow and black coloration. It's literally a warning signal to other critters that, hey, I will sting you. But in this case, both of these animals are harmful or quote unquote bad. I don't want to call them bad, but it's a warning signal to other animals. So that's Mullerian mimicry. So the main difference between Batesian and Mullerian is Batesian has a harmless animal mimicking a harmful animal, where Mullerian has two harmful animals mimicking each other. And then last but not least, in the form of this mimesis or mimicry, we have what's called aggressive mimicry. And this is often used by predators in which they're trying to lure a prey item. They're pretending to be something else or camouflaging themselves to be something else to lure their prey item closer. And if you recall that image earlier of the orchid praying mantis, that works both ways. It hides itself from being preyed on by birds, but it also lures other unsuspecting insects, prey items, closer to them so they can then feed on them. But what we're going to show here is a neat demonstration. If you look there in that picture I just put up, that little orange thing resting in there, if you're not familiar with that is the tongue of a snapping turtle. And they're quite similar to what a worm looks like. And so a snapping turtle will lay on the bottom of the stream or the pond, and it'll open up its mouth and it will wiggle its tongue back and forth. And like I said, it looks exactly like a little worm. And so when it does that, it attracts some of these prey items. So these fish will swim by thinking it's an easy meal, and as soon as that fish swims close, that snapping turtle then has its meal. So it's using this aggressive mimicry to lure prey items. So this aggressive mimicry is literally where a predator uses some type of camouflage or trickery to lure prey items close to it. So you never realized there was all this really cool stuff in the animal kingdom, or at least I didn't. Here's another really good example of this aggressive mimicry. What I have there is a little picture of a lightning bug or a firefly. It's a female that is, excuse me, it's a female in the genus Photurus. And this is just a regular old firefly. It's a relatively large firefly, but what she does is pure evil. And only it takes a pretty strange mind to think of this. But what she does is she flashes the kind of mating display of another firefly from the genus Photinus, which is a smaller version. It's a much smaller firefly, but she flashes the light of this other genus, and what it does, it attracts the males from this other genus, and when they come close, she grabs them, she feeds on them. So she plays the dating card, so to speak, and she attracts these males by flashing their mating signals, and then she draws them in closer, and then she's got food for however long to feast on. So pretty crazy, pretty neat when you think about it, but that's another form of this aggressive mimicry. So either of you, hey Trish, I saw you popped in. Either of you have questions about any of this mimesis? If not, I'm going to move on. And we're going to do this presentation relatively quick. Okay, so now what we're going to do, we're going to talk a little bit about this other side of the equation of camouflage. This is that crypsis, or the blending in. Instead of trying to copy something else, whether or not it's an inanimate object or another animal, this is simply trying to blend into your surroundings. And this is that concept called crypsis. And so what I want to do is this is what most people think of in the true art of camouflage. Camouflage comes from the French word camoufler, which simply means to disguise. And so they're just trying to disguise themselves to blend into the natural surroundings. And so there's three different strategies that animals use to kind of go unnoticed, so to speak. And so let's talk about the first way, which is probably the most popular. This is what most people think of, and it's this idea of color resemblance. You're trying to blend into the background. And so I have up here this picture of the owl. Now right away, you see that owl right away simply because its eye is open, and that eye really stands out. But if that owl were to close its eyes, he blends in pretty darn good. So this is a great example of how an animal could literally blend into the background. Another really good example are these birds here. If you don't know what these are white-tailed ptarmigan. And in the wintertime, they're a northern species, usually up in Canada mostly. But for the most part, they live in cold climates. Alpine tundra, if they're down lower, they live higher up in the elevation. And so in the wintertime, when there's a lot of snow on the ground, these birds are completely white, except for their eyeballs and their beaks. And so when they sit in the snow, they could barely, they literally go unseen. The cool thing with these ptarmigan is they oftentimes live in areas where the snow may melt and you could get patchy snow or maybe not even any snow at all. And they have these seasonal changes to their plumage where they'll develop this brown and this mottling. If there's patches of snow, this bird here blends in perfectly. Now, they will even go so far where if the snow completely melts, they'll be completely drab brown. And so these birds literally change their plumage seasonally to make sure they keep blending in with the surrounding. And that's pretty darn awesome. And let's jump back to that favorite animal of mine. If you look at this, it is so hard to see these birds. Here's another nightjar that's just sitting in the leaves. And if you don't know where to look, he would literally go unnoticed. So I'll help you out there. There's the outline of him. And when you take it away, he simply disappears into that background again. So these nightjars or nighthawks are just completely masters of disguise with resembling the background. And probably the most popular, most well-known of all of this color resemblance where you're blending in is a chameleon. Obviously, chameleons are not native to North America, but everyone knows what a chameleon is, and literally, if you put a different background behind it, it can change its skin color to match that background, usually within a few minutes. And so they are the true master of disguise when it comes to resembling the colors of their background. And so that's color resemblance. Everyone is pretty much thinks of that when you think of camouflage. But here's another method that animals use. Obviously, it's not on purpose, it's through evolution. It's this concept of counter shading. And this was relatively new. I heard of it before, but I really explored it while researching this webinar. And so if we look at counter shading, it is known in the animal kingdom as Thayer's Law. And literally what it is animals that live in either the open ocean or just an open territory, they tend to have a darker top side and be lighter on the bottom. And so right here is a great white shark. In fact, let me put up its prey item because this works for both predator and prey. These are what we call pelagic fish. These are open water, open ocean fish. And so if you notice on this, they're darker on top, lighter on the bottom. Now this counter shading works in a couple of different ways. First off, if you're below this animal and you're looking up, you're looking towards a bright sky. And so it's going to be bright up there, so with a white bottom, it blends in really well. Same thing on the flip side. If you're looking down at these animals and they're on the ocean floor where it's much darker and they have a dark side, they blend in a whole lot better. So when you're looking from the top or the bottom, it helps them blend in so much more. But even the lighting itself, if an animal is all one color, the exact same color, and the sun shined on it, the sun would light up that animal on the top side and it'd be shaded on the bottom. And so this balances kind of like the colors from the sun, helps even it out, helps that animal kind of disappear into the background. And so it's not just in the fish world. You look at birds. Birds are often displaying this counter shading where they're dark on the top and lighter on the bottom. And like I said, when you're looking up at them, if they're in the sky, that white, they blend in really well, where if you're looking down at them on the ground, they blend into the ground. And so it's really, really cool to see a lot of this counter shading in so many different species. And it even extends all the way up into the mammals. And so here you have this ibex that has darker on top, lighter on the bottom. And you really wouldn't think about it much. It's because it's a big animal. How can you not see it? But it truly does help them when the sun is shining on them from a great distance. It allows them to kind of blend into their background really, really well. And you'll see this in a video I have coming up here shortly. And so besides the big animals, even smaller animals like squirrels will have this counter shading, dark on top, light on the bottom. And it's just, once again, it's a method of helping them kind of blend in from a greater distance, animals that are seeking them out. So that's counter shading. And the last thing I want to talk about regarding crypsis, or this art of camouflage, is this concept of disruptive coloration. And so the best way to think about it is, if you can picture an animal in your mind, doesn't matter if it's a zebra, a dog, a cat, a bird, whatever, you know exactly what form it has. And so you can kind of picture their shape. And so disruptive coloration, when you put just, whether or not it's stripes or polka dots or spots or whatever, you put that on an animal, it breaks up its outline. And so probably the greatest example is zebras. We know that these zebra stripes help them in a number of ways. First, if there's a large herd of zebras and a lion comes in to take one, all the stripes moving in different directions kind of confuse the animal. But there's even been studies that show that flies, which can be thought of as another predator of the zebra, they don't like landing on the striped surface because it kind of discombobulates them. But it's not just restricted to prey items. So look at predator. You have this leopard or jaguar, which is, this is actually a leopard, excuse me. You wouldn't think that spots help you blend in, but because it breaks up that outline, it allows these cats to kind of absorb themselves into the background, and they literally disappear. So those are the three different forms of crypsis, of ways for animals to blend into the background. So that's all I'm going to teach you about. So we went through mimesis, we went through crypsis. Remember, mimesis is mimicry. They're copying an inanimate object or another animal. And then crypsis is where they're try to camouflage themselves or blend into the background. And so we're going to go through a little quiz to show you how wonderful these things are. And I will talk you through these, but you may not have noticed this, but on the advertisement that I used for this Cryptic Critters class, did anyone notice that animal that's in the middle of the picture? If you haven't, let me outline it. There's a copperhead laying in the leaves, and they blend in like no other snake. They're so difficult to see. So I'll actually put that back up, because even when you take it away, it's amazing how well that thing blends in. And so that is a great example of that color blending. And just if you didn't know where you're stepping, and this, you have to understand, some birds and some other animals will feed on these snakes. They don't want to be seen. Same thing with their prey items. If they're feeding on mice, they want to get close to their prey items. And so this color resemblance is absolutely wonderful for them, wonderful tool for them to use. Wait until you see some of these other, Sandy. If you weren't in on the presentation a few days, were you here a few days ago for on Thursday when I first did this? Oh, okay, good. I know. I think Ginny and Trish were both there. So actually, I'll see, Sandy. You'll be my test subject for this one. So we'll put this up there. This one's relatively easy to see, simply because the tail kind of sticks out. But this is starting to give you a good idea of this crypsis, where they're blending into their background. And so this here is a lizard, and it's pretty amazing matching that they do on the bark of that tree. Now, if you look at this here, this is a katydid. This here is a form of mimicry, because they're trying to look exactly like a leaf. So think of it this way. With that previous lizard, if I put this up there, if you take that lizard off and just put him on the ground, he's going to look like a lizard. Whereas in the form of mimicry, you take this katydid, you take him off the leaf, and you put him in your driveway, it's still going to look like a leaf. You're still going to have a hard time figuring out that's an animal, because it's looking like something else. So these katydids are really good examples of mimicry. One of my favorite pictures is this one here, because it took me forever when I was researching. I'm like, there's no way there's something there. Right, I don't even know what kind of caterpillar this is or what kind of insect this is, but this thing blends into the background of that leaf. I should have brought in a couple other pictures, because they did have different pictures of this, if you can still see it, of this insect on the leaf that is just an amazing adaptation, so it cannot be seen by some of the predators that might prey on it. Again, that's a great form of crypsis. Here is another perfect example. Sandy, can you see what's in this photo? Or can you guess what's in this photo? And in fact, what I'm going to do, see anything yet? It's not the stick. Let me change colors here. So right there is some kind of frog or toad. And so, yep, it's a frog. So amazing way that animal blends in. Things passing by would never even know that thing was there. All right, next picture we have here, and I just put this up on the Facebook page. Again, you can kind of see where the legs make it stand out, but that spider, again, it's using its ability to blend into the background, this crypsis. It's using that to avoid being preyed upon by potential birds or any other animal that would eat that thing. But it also uses that camouflage to attract some of its prey items. So smaller insects, when they're flying by, they have no idea that that spider is sitting there on the tree. All right, this is one of my favorites. Sandy, no cheating, Ginny or Trish. What do you see in this picture? When I was first looking at this, I looked and looked and looked and looked, and then it's like, oh my gosh. All right, do you want me to circle? Once you know it's there, once you know it's there, it's like, holy cow. Part of the reason is most people are looking in the wrong spot. Oh, sorry, that was a bad. Man, my circling skills are terrible. Pretty amazing. And so you would never, yeah, that's not just a cat. That's a big old cat. So that's a leopard right there. So you wouldn't think that a leopard, being such a large animal, sit next to a tree. It's like, oh my gosh, I'd see it right away. When you're somewhat distracted, and for example, many people are kind of focusing in on the tree, you can walk right up to some of these big cats. And that's probably why these larger prey items completely miss it. They're focused on some other aspect of the landscape, and these cats will blend in literally in plain sight. And so I think that's a wonderful example of that disruptive coloration. All right, next photo. This one's here. You can see it after a while, but again, it's a large cat. But you wouldn't think that these leopards or jaguars could blend in so easily, but it's sitting right here. Another big old cat just sitting up in the tree. Here is a beautiful photo of a great gray owl. Now, the heart shape of the face gives this away, but look at the body. You couldn't match those colors more perfectly with the white and the gray. And so this is a great example of color resemblance. And so those things can blend in like no other to go undetected as their prey items walk before them. Then one would probably not think that giraffes can blend in, but believe it or not, giraffes can sometimes blend in as well. I thought that was a cool picture to throw it in there. Have a big old frog. Obviously, again, the eye gives it away pretty quickly. This little critter gets preyed on by so many things from birds to small mammals, and so he blends into that background really, really well. That's a little lizard. Don't know what species of lizard, but a lot of these lizards have that grayish ground-looking type of coloration to help them blend into the ground in which they walk. And then this guy, he blows me away because I still can't get a great picture of him. But if you're looking at this guy, this is a lizard on a tree, and down here is the face and his. Man, I'm doing terrible on my circling. Right there is the face, and you can see his little fingers from his front forelimb. But he literally looks like the fungus growing on a tree. And so just a fantastic job of blending in on that particular guy. And then what we have here, the reason I show this obviously is a snow leopard, and you can see him somewhat quickly because he's a large object in this particular picture. But this snow leopard is sitting on some rocks in a somewhat dry, rocky area, and he matches or he blends in really well. And so from a distance, this guy would be literally very, very hard to detect. The cool thing with that snow leopard, you put him in a completely different environment, and here we have a situation where you have snow on the ground, and he is still blending in. Again, this is another snow leopard. He's still blending in wonderfully. So the fact that this disruptive coloration, some of these drab colorations, they allow these animals to blend in under any condition. And so it's just a truly wonderful adaptation that has developed over time. And then here we have these toads or frogs. I don't know what species it is. These are not North American, but literally mimicking the leaf forms and the leaf coloration. So there's actually 3 frogs there, so pretty neat there. Again, another toad or a frog on the bark. Again, avoiding detection by lots of predators that would feed upon it. And then, last but not least, I have this one here. There's a large animal in this picture. It's kind of hard to see, so I will circle it. There's a large, not exactly sure what kind of antelope or deer this is, but it's standing there. You can see just from a distance they blend in really, really well. But what I want to do now is show you, I'm going to stop this, I'm going to show you a video. Hopefully this will work for you guys, because I think this is pretty wonderful video that demonstrates how well some of these animals could blend in. So what we have here, I'm going to pause it. Let me know, does everyone see the video? Does anyone not see the video? Okay. So if you look at this, I paused it so it's freeze framed right now. And if you look at that, what can you see there in that picture? You can see there's probably 3 or 4, and what these animals are, these are called tar. They're this goat-like animal in New Zealand. But watch this. This is pretty amazing, because if you're sitting there, you're like, oh, I see a couple animals in the rocks. And all of a sudden, watch what happens here in a second. There's a whole lot more animals than you anticipated. Now, understand, some of these were in the bushes that you couldn't really see them, but no one would have expected there to be about 20 or 25 of those animals sitting on that hillside. So let me play that video again. So here they are sitting here, and when they're laying in the grass, or at least near some of this vegetation, they are literally unseen, even though they're all right there. And so I think it's a pretty amazing adaptation to have such large creatures that from a distance can literally disappear right before your eyes. So I thought that was a really cool video. So let me jump back to my presentation. Oops, didn't want to do that. I shared the wrong thing. Tell me when. All right, does everyone have that picture up again? All right. Last but not least, the greatest camouflage of all. Now, I thought this was funny, but a pretty good way to end it. The fact that animals can adapt and blend into the background. Now, when I say they adapt, this is not a conscious decision by them. This is over years of living in the same environment in which they learn to adapt to that. So let's summarize what we were learning today. And so when we're talking about camouflage, there's literally 2 different ways for animals to hide in plain sight. So they can disappear literally right before your eyes. Now, the first way is this idea of mimesis. And again, don't worry about remembering that fancy word, but it literally means mimicry. So they are trying to mimic or become exactly like another object, whether or not it's an inanimate object like a stick or a twig or a flower, or they can sometimes mimic another animal to help protect them or hide in plain sight. And then there's this concept of crypsis, which is more the typical run-of-the-mill camouflage method. And so when we're talking about mimesis, when we're talking about mimicry, remember there's Batesian mimicry, is where you have a good or a harmless animal that mimics a bad animal or a harmful animal. So think of a non-venomous snake mimicking a venomous snake, so other things leave it alone. That's Batesian mimicry. Then you have this Mullerian mimicry, where you have two bad animals, whether or not they're both harmful or they both sting. They 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 mimic the exact same coloration, so animals learn to avoid those colors altogether. And then the really cool one that I love is that aggressive mimicry. And so it's where a predator uses some type of uh, tomfoolery or trickery to lure its prey item. And so I use the two examples of the snapping turtle tongue, where it lures, it mimics a worm to lure fish closer to its mouth, or even in that firefly example where you have a female firefly that mimics the mating call of another of another firefly to lure the male to his eventual doom. And so those are three really interesting and neat forms of mimicry. And then when you get to crypsis or camouflage, most animals use this color resemblance where they're just trying to blend in the background. And you had all those frogs, the owl, so many different kind of birds will use this color resemblance so they kind of blend into wherever they're sitting. But you also have this idea of counter shading. So lots of fish, these animals that live in open areas, this counter shading, this pelagic fish, these open water fish like sharks and tunas, all sorts of different fish will have this shading where they're darker on the top, lighter on the bottom. Same with birds. Lots of birds have that dark on top, light on the bottom, and even mammals, even the large mammals, will sometimes have this counter shading to help them blend in from greater distances. And then last but not least, you have that color pattern that's this disruptive coloration. It literally breaks up their shape. So if you're not paying attention, you can walk right up to these animals and you not even realize they're there. Now you take one of these animals like a leopard or a zebra and you just put them in the middle of a room or something, they stand out like crazy. But you put them in a different environment, they kind of disappear in the background because their form is all broken up. So really, really cool ways in which animals can hide from each other and help them adapt to this predator-prey relationship, either hide from being eaten or to hide so they can eat another animal. So it's truly wonderful adaptations. And with that, I want to thank you for sitting in, the three of you. You guys are awesome. I was more than welcome or prepared to do this by my lonesome today, but those were, I got to give my photo credits. So Bob Howdeshell, Steve Winter, bunch of National Geographic photos, which were wonderful. Y'all know how to reach Wildlife for You. Just so you know, I updated the website tonight. I already got a few new classes up there. But follow us on Facebook. I'm going to be announcing a new deal. In fact, if I show you here, I'm putting together a package. I've got 2 cat classes coming up. This one is going to be October 6th. I never did change this slide, but this cougar country is going to be October 6th, and it's going to focus mostly on cougar encounters. I did that class bear encounters. And so this one coming up is going to be about dealing with cougar encounters. And yes, I'm going to have a video or 2. And so hopefully that runs well. That will be October 6th. And then we also have this class called Panthera, which is going to be talking about the genus Panthera, which is all the 4 biggest cats of the world. So we're talking about lions, tigers, leopards, and jaguars. Stephanie Dennis will be helping me on that particular class. She's a big cat person. And so those 2 classes, obviously the classes are usually $15 each, but we're gonna offer a combo package, the combo cat package, which is going to be $20 for both of them. And so I'm going to post that on Facebook in just a little while, hopefully. So with that, I do want to thank you. And if you have, Sandy, if you have any questions, since you're my only newbie here, let me know. But otherwise, I thank you for joining in so I didn't have to sit here by my lonesome. But anyone receiving this recording, thanks for sticking with me. I apologize for all the technical difficulties we had on Thursday, but hopefully that's behind us. Trish, by all means, please ask away. That is a wonderful question. Trish asked, what if the species being mimicked becomes extinct? Does the species mimicking also lose? I wish there was a good way to know the answer to that. I don't know if we have any good examples of that happening, but considering we're in one of the greatest mass extinctions going on the planet that the planet has ever seen, I'm sure that is bound to happen. Here's the thing: it would be so difficult to test and find out about that because the way these animals evolve, where one animal will mimic another animal, you're talking thousands and thousands of years of natural selection. And so you have to understand it's these things don't happen quickly. And so in the process of natural selection, it is all it's doing is the animals that can survive and reproduce obviously pass their genes along. So if you have a harmless animal that there's a mutation and it gets born and it looks like this other animal that other animals don't mess with, that harmless animal then has a better chance of surviving and passing on its genes. And so, therefore, it's a long, drawn out process in which this mimicry takes place. So, if one animal simply goes extinct really quickly, it's going to take a long, long time for that adaptation to change. Who knows whether or not it's a very difficult question to answer because this process of these adaptations just take forever to unfold before our eyes. See, and here's what I'm thinking. I was thinking of monarchs too, but well, monarchs and viceroy, um, they're both quote unquote harmful to birds. But let's play the game. Say the viceroys were harmless and the monarchs were harmful. Or, okay, tell you what. Let's not even go down that road. Let's take the coral snake and the king snake. So say coral snakes go extinct, and these king snakes are still there, still in the same color pattern. Birds or other creatures don't mess with it. What it's going to take is some mutations on the predator side to get an animal that will sometime actually feed on that harmless king snake. And it's going to take a long, long time for that adaptation to change. So I'm fumbling through this. It's just going to take way long to know exactly what happens in that particular situation. But nature will adapt, things will overcome, things will change. That is the one cool thing about nature is it's always changing. I did an awful job answering that. I'm sorry. You stumped me on that one. Anyway, any other questions? I wish I could answer you better, Trish. It just takes forever for these adaptations to occur. All right. My doggies look like they are chilling out. I think I'm going to chill out for the rest of the night as well. So thanks for joining in, guys. I will now send out this recording and make it available, but you guys are awesome, and I appreciate you popping in and keeping me company.